How has your day been so far? Hello, we're AETA Stories, and today we're sharing a brand new original story with you.
Claire Bennett had built her life on steadiness. At 34, she was known for her composure, measured in speech, deliberate in action, rarely shaken by pressure. Success had come early to her, but it had never separated her from the people who mattered most. Her parents were not just family. They were the quiet axis around which her life turned. Every major decision, every long road she chose to take, had been shaped by conversations at their kitchen table, by their faith in her judgment and their constant presence in her days. That was why their excitement felt so contagious when they told her about the property. They spoke of a remote, long-abandoned farm tucked into the mountains of Idaho, not far from the Salmon River region, land that had once been worked and then forgotten. According to old records and recent photographs, the farmhouse still stood, weathered, neglected but intact. What surrounded it mattered even more. Rolling meadows, forest edges, clean air, and views that stretched for miles. Claire's parents saw what others had overlooked. With the right care, it could become a destination, eco-lodging seasonal retreats, a place for people who wanted distance from cities and closeness to silence. They talked about it the way people talk about a second youth, their voices animated, almost light. Claire listened, smiling, amused by their enthusiasm, but also quietly impressed. Her father had always been good at seeing potential. Her mother had always believed that places carried memory, and that restoring them was a way of honoring what had been lost. To reach the property quickly, they planned a reconnaissance flight. Jack Reynolds offered to take them. Jack had been part of Claire's life for as long as she could remember. A retired helicopter pilot, he had flown rescue missions, survey routes, and private charters for decades. He was a longtime friend of the family, reliable, meticulous, and deeply fond of Claire's parents. To Claire, he was less a family friend than a constant presence, the kind of man who showed up when help was needed and never made a show of it. He spoke about the flight with calm confidence. The distance was long by road but manageable by air. Weather reports were clear. The helicopter was well maintained. There was nothing risky about the plan. Claire didn't join them. Work obligations kept her in Boise, and the trip was meant to be brief, a simple visual inspection, photographs. Coordinates, a first impression. They promised to call as soon as they landed. That call never came. The news reached her later that afternoon, delivered by a voice that sounded far away, even as it spoke directly into her ear. There had been an incident mid-flight, an emergency. The helicopter went down before it could reach the property. The investigation would later conclude that Jack Reynolds suffered a massive heart attack while piloting. There was no time to correct course, no time to land, no warning signs that anyone could have acted on. Claire lost both her parents in a single moment. There was no final conversation, no goodbye spoken in awareness of its weight. One morning they were planning a future, imagining restored walls and open windows. By evening, they were gone. In the days that followed, Claire moved through arrangements and formalities with the same composure she was known for, as if her body understood what her mind had not yet accepted. She signed documents, answered questions, thanked people who offered condolences. At night, when silence settled in her home, the reality pressed closer. But even then it felt unreal, suspended, as though grief had paused before fully entering her life. Everything she had known stood unchanged on the outside. Inside, something fundamental had been removed. The loss was absolute, sudden, irreversible, and without realizing it, Claire Bennett had reached the point from which her life could only move forward along a path she had never imagined choosing. After the funeral, Claire Bennett's world contracted sharply. The constant movement of people, relatives, colleagues, acquaintances who felt obligated to appear, slowly faded away, leaving only two figures standing close to her in the quiet that followed. One was Mark Sullivan, her fiancé. The other was Rachel Owens, her best friend since college. Everyone else returned to their lives. These two stayed. Mark had been part of Claire's life for a little over 2 years. They had met at a horse farm on the outskirts of Boise, a place her father had suggested she visit when she mentioned wanting something that required patience rather than command. Business, he told her, responded to orders. Horses did not. They required attention, respect, and restraint. Claire listened, as she often did, and signed up for lessons. Mark was one of the trainers there. He noticed her immediately, not only because of her appearance, but because of the way she carried herself. She asked thoughtful questions. She learned quickly. She didn't pretend to know more than she did. Mark was tall, athletic, and perpetually relaxed, with a kind of smile that suggested ease rather than effort. He spoke confidently, but never loudly. He made people feel noticed. Their connection grew without force. Mark didn't overwhelm her with constant messages or dramatic gestures. He timed his attention carefully, checking in, then stepping back, creating the sense that time with him was chosen rather than demanded. When he invited her out, it was never to crowded bars or noisy places. He preferred quiet restaurants, long conversations, small gifts that felt personal rather than extravagant. Claire found the balance appealing. Her parents met him several months later. Her father liked Mark almost immediately. He saw in him someone practical, physically capable, and seemingly grounded. Her mother was more reserved. She watched Mark closely, listen more than she spoke, and ask questions that seemed casual on the surface but carried weight beneath them. Once, after Mark had left, her mother mentioned, gently, that charm could be learned. But character revealed itself slowly. She told Claire to listen to her instincts, especially if unease ever appeared without a clear reason. At the time, Claire had smiled and dismissed the thought. There was no unease. There was only comfort. Now, in the aftermath of loss, Mark became constant. He handled arrangements when Claire felt unable to speak. He stood beside her through every conversation, every formality. He moved into her house without discussion, filling the empty space with routine. Meals prepared, lights turned on at the right hour, quiet reminders to rest. He did not rush her grief or demand progress from it. Rachel was there as well. She stayed overnight when nights felt too long. She held Claire's hand during moments when composure slipped. Together, the two of them formed a small barrier between Claire and the weight of what she had lost. From the outside, Mark appeared unwavering. He spoke little about the future, avoided any mention of timelines or expectations. When Claire pulled away emotionally, he did not protest. When she buried herself in work, he told her he understood. He presented himself as a man who knew how to wait. Only later would Claire realize how carefully that steadiness had been constructed. In the early weeks of grief, she accepted what was offered to her without question. Support, consistency, presence, these felt like proof of loyalty. And so trust, already rooted, deepened quietly. Beneath that calm surface, tension began to form. It did not announce itself. It did not demand attention. It simply waited unnoticed, for the moment when it would no longer need to hide. Grief did not arrive in Claire Bennett's life as a storm. It settled like weight, constant, dull, and pressing, making even simple moments feel heavy. When the days grew too quiet, when the house echoed with the absence of her parents, she turned to the one place where silence had rules and purpose. She returned to work. At first, it was practical. There were contracts to review, properties to assess, decisions that required her signature. But soon, work became more than responsibility. It became refuge. Claire volunteered for site visits that could have been delegated. She chose projects far from Boise, properties scattered across rural counties, places that required hours of driving and nights spent in unfamiliar towns. Distance gave her relief. Movement kept her from standing, still long enough to feel everything at once. She told herself the travel was temporary, necessary, a way to regain control. While she was gone, Mark settled into her home. It happened gradually without a formal conversation. A jacket left on a chair, shoes by the door, groceries stocked in the refrigerator before she returned from a trip. When Claire noticed, she didn't object. The house had felt too empty. Mark's presence softened the edges of it. He took over routines with ease. Laundry appeared folded. The trash was always taken out. The lights were left on in rooms Claire hadn't realized she avoided after sunset. He didn't ask for thanks or acknowledgement. He simply acted as though he belonged there, as though this role had always been his. Claire would return home after days on the road, exhausted and emotionally spent, to find dinner waiting. Sometimes it was something simple. Other times, something he knew she liked. Mark greeted her with the same calm smile each time, never questioning where she had been or how long she planned to stay. He asked how the trip went, listened without interruption, and never pressed when she answered briefly. The consistency was comforting. Rachel stopped by occasionally, usually when Claire was home. She joked that Mark had become domesticated, that he was too good to be true. Claire smiled at that, but didn't linger on it. She didn't want to analyze what felt stable. Stability after loss felt fragile. She treated it carefully, the way one might treat something borrowed. As the weeks passed, Claire's absences grew longer. She stayed overnight near properties she was evaluating, took early morning meetings, returned late. Each time, the house welcomed her back unchanged. Mark was always there. The routines were intact. Nothing appeared disrupted. Claire never asked what Mark did while she was gone. It wasn't indifference. It was trust. She believed that if something mattered, it would make itself known. And Mark gave her no reason to doubt him. His patience seemed endless, his support unconditional. He never complained about her schedule, never suggested she slow down. He told her she was strong, capable, that her parents would be proud of how she was handling everything. Those words mattered to her more than she realized. From the outside, Claire's life appeared balanced again. Work provided structure. Home offered calm. Grief, though present, seemed contained, managed within boundaries she believed she controlled. But beneath that appearance of order, something false had taken shape. The quiet stability she relied on was not as solid as it seemed. It held together because no one had tested it yet, and Claire, moving steadily forward, had no idea how close she was to the moment when that calm would break completely. The decision to visit the abandoned farm came quietly. Claire Bennett mentioned it one evening as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table. She said it without drama, almost casually, explaining that her father had believed deeply in the place. He had spoken about it with certainty, not as a dream, but as a plan waiting for time. Claire felt that if she didn't go now, she never would. The distance felt manageable. The timing felt right. Mark listened and nodded. He asked practical questions: how long the drive would be, whether the roads were accessible this time of year. He didn't object. He didn't insist on coming with her. His expression held something close to satisfaction, though Claire didn't notice it then. Her thoughts were already on the road ahead, on the chance to see what her parents had seen. She left early the next morning. The highway stretched open and quiet, the city thinning behind her. After nearly an hour of driving, something tightened in her chest. Claire reached for the passenger seat, then the back, then checked the trunk in her mind. The folder, her parents' research folder, photographs, handwritten notes, calculations, maps. She had left it by the front door. Without it, the trip felt meaningless. Annoyed with herself, she slowed, signaled, and turned back toward Boise. The frustration was sharp but fleeting. She told herself she would grab the folder and be back on the road within minutes. When she pulled into the driveway, The house looked exactly as she had left it. Quiet. Still. Nothing out of place. Inside. She stepped through the entryway and reached for the folder. It was there, resting where she remembered. She picked it up, tucked it under her arm, and turned toward the door again. That was when she heard laughter. It wasn't loud. It was careless. Familiar. The sound came from the bedroom. Claire stopped. Her body reacted before her thoughts did, her breath tightening as something cold spread through her chest. She stood still for a moment, listening, telling herself there had to be an explanation that made sense. Rachel might have stopped by. Mark might have said something funny. The door was closed. That didn't mean anything. She moved forward on instinct. The hallway felt longer than usual. Her steps were quiet, almost detached, as though she were watching herself walk rather than doing it. When she reached the bedroom door, she didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She opened it. The sight registered in fragments. Mark, Rachel, their clothes scattered. The bed she had slept in the night before. Two faces turning toward her at the same time, eyes wide with shock. For a moment, the room tilted. Claire felt nausea rise sharply, her vision blurring at the edges. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself, forcing her body to stay upright. Her heart pounded, but her expression remained eerily calm, as though her mind had gone somewhere distant to avoid the impact all at once. Mark spoke first. He said her name. Then he said it wasn't what it looked like. Rachel scrambled for something to cover herself, unable to meet Claire's eyes. She moved quickly, wordless, her face flushed with shame. Mark, however, found his voice. He blamed exhaustion, loneliness, Claire's constant absences. He said she had been gone so much that he hadn't known how to reach her anymore. His tone carried accusation, as though her grief had been an inconvenience he had endured long enough. Claire listened without interruption. Something in her settled. The sickness eased, replaced by a hollow clarity. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions that no longer mattered. The betrayal had aligned itself too perfectly with every quiet discomfort she had ignored. She told them both to leave. Rachel fled first, grabbing whatever she could reach, her eyes fixed on the floor. Mark followed, wrapping a sheet around himself, still talking, still trying to justify what had already destroyed everything. He paused in the hallway, looking at Claire as though waiting for her to stop him, to argue, to beg him to stay. She didn't. Claire stood in the doorway until the house was empty again. Then she closed the door, set the folder down, and leaned against the wall as the silence returned, heavier than before, but unmistakably clear. The rupture was complete. Nothing could be repaired. Nothing needed to be explained. In that moment, Claire Bennett lost the last illusion that had been holding her upright, and with it, the life she thought she was still standing in disappeared completely. Claire Bennett did not sit down to think. She did not walk through the house, touching familiar objects, searching for something to hold on to. The moment the door closed behind Mark and Rachel, the space no longer felt like shelter. It felt contaminated, every wall carrying an echo of what had just been revealed. She picked up her car keys, the research folder, and nothing else. Within minutes, she was driving. The streets of Boise blurred past her windshield. Traffic lights changing without meaning, familiar intersections passing without recognition. Her hands remained steady on the steering wheel, her posture controlled, as though muscle memory had taken over while her mind withdrew. She did not cry. She did not replay the scene in her head. It was as if her emotions had retreated somewhere deep, choosing numbness over collapse. The road stretched on. Hours passed. The city gave way to open land, then to quieter highways bordered by scrub and forest. The terrain grew rougher, more remote. Cell service weakened and then disappeared entirely. Claire welcomed the absence. There was nothing left behind that required explanation, no one she needed to update or reassure. She drove until her body ached with fatigue. When she finally slowed, it was because the road itself demanded it, narrowing, uneven, leading into a small mountain village that appeared almost forgotten by time. A few houses showed signs of life, smoke rising from a chimney, a porch light glowing faintly. Most stood dark and still, their windows blank, their yards overtaken by weeds. Claire parked near the edge of the village and stepped out of the car. The air was cooler here, sharper. It carried the scent of earth and pine. Sound felt distant, muffled, as though the land absorbed it before it could travel far. She stood for a moment, stretching stiff muscles, orienting herself. This was the place, close enough to the abandoned farm her parents had spoken about with such certainty. She drove on. The road climbed gradually, curving toward higher ground. When the farmhouse came into view, Claire slowed again, not out of hesitation but recognition. It was impossible to miss. The structure stood alone on a rise, weathered but upright, its outline distinct against the wide sky. The house had clearly been abandoned for years. Shutters hung unevenly. The porch showed signs of rot. Paint had peeled away, exposing raw wood beneath. And yet the windows were intact. The roof, though worn, still held. It was damaged, not destroyed. What surrounded it took her breath away. Meadows stretched outward in gentle waves, grasses moving softly in the wind. Forest lined one side of the property, dense and protective. In the distance, the land sloped toward a river, its surface catching light as it wound through the valley below. The view was vast, untouched, quietly magnificent. Claire stood there, taking it in. The contrast was jarring. Beauty paired with neglect. Potential standing beside abandonment. It mirrored something she recognized too well. The land felt alive, waiting, even as the house bore the marks of being left behind. She felt nothing at first. No grief, no anger, no relief, just stillness. The silence pressed in around her, not empty but full, of space, of distance, of the absence of voices that had once filled her life. It did not comfort her. It did not threaten her. It simply existed, indifferent to what she had lost. For the first time since the door had closed behind her earlier that day, Claire did not feel the need to move. She had come as far as she could, without stopping. And in that isolated place, surrounded by land that asked nothing of her, Claire Bennett stood alone, emotionally numb, suspended between what had been taken from her and whatever lay ahead. Unseen and undefined, Claire Bennett entered the farmhouse slowly, pushing the door open with measured pressure, as if unsure how the space might respond to being disturbed. The hinges complained softly, the sound echoing through rooms that had not heard footsteps in a long time. Inside, the air carried the scent of dust, old wood, and dried leaves that had found their way in through broken seams over the years. Light filtered through the windows in pale strips, revealing the outlines of rooms left unfinished by time. Claire moved from one to the next without urgency, her footsteps cautious, her attention sharpened by a quiet curiosity she hadn't felt in weeks. She wasn't searching for anything in particular. She simply wanted to understand why her parents had believed so strongly in this place. In one of the back rooms, she stopped. On the wall, partially faded but unmistakable, was a drawing. It had been made with colored pencils, the lines uneven, the proportions imperfect in a way that could only belong to a child. The image showed the farmhouse as it once might have been, upright, cared for, surrounded by open land. A yard stretched in front. Trees lined the edge of the property. And beside the house, drawn a little too close, stood a single tree marked with an arrow. At the base of the arrow, a small red cross had been pressed into the paper with deliberate force. Claire stepped closer. The paper had yellowed with age. Its edges curled slightly where the adhesive had dried out. The drawing wasn't decorative. It wasn't careless. It felt intentional, as though it had been left behind for a reason. She followed the direction of the arrow with her eyes, tracing it from the drawn house to the imagined tree. Then she looked out the window. From where she stood, she could see it, not far from the farmhouse. Down a gentle slope stood a lone rowan tree. Its trunk was thicker than the others nearby, its branches heavy with clusters of red berries that stood out against the beginning hints of autumn in the surrounding forest. Claire felt a subtle tightening in her chest, a sensation that wasn't fear but recognition. She folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Outside, the land was uneven, the grass tall and untrimmed. Claire walked toward the tree, guided more by instinct than logic. The closer she got, the more certain she felt that the drawing and the place were connected by something deeper than coincidence. At the base of the rowan tree, the ground looked different. The grass was thinner, flattened in places, as though it had once been disturbed and then left to recover. Claire stood there for a moment, listening to the wind move through the branches overhead. She returned to her car and retrieved a small shovel from the trunk. She didn't question the decision. She only knew that digging with her hands felt impossible. The soil beneath the tree was soft. She worked carefully at first, pushing aside roots and earth. The sound of metal cutting through dirt steady and controlled. After several minutes, the shovel struck something solid with a dull, unmistakable sound. Claire froze. She cleared the surrounding soil slowly, revealing the corner of a small metal box, its surface darkened with age but intact. With both hands, she lifted it from the ground and set it on the grass beside her. Back inside the farmhouse, she placed the box near a window where the light was strongest. It took effort to open. The lid resisted at first, as though testing her resolve. Inside, everything had been wrapped carefully in layers of plastic. The first item she uncovered was a letter. The paper was worn, the handwriting deliberate but unsteady in places. It was addressed to a son. A father wrote of love, of regret, of time running out. He explained his illness. He apologized for what he could not change. He spoke of hope, not for himself, but for the life his son would continue without him. Beneath the letter lay a small velvet pouch. When Claire opened it, light caught on the contents and scattered across the table. Uncut and cut diamonds rested in her palm, their weight unmistakable, their value beyond question. Claire closed her hand around them, then opened it again. The realization came without hesitation. None of this belonged to her. The box, the letter. The stones, they were an inheritance meant for someone else. A child who had once drawn a map, trusting that one day it would lead him back to what his father had left behind. Claire sat back in her chair, the room suddenly quieter than before. In her chest, something shifted. The discovery had opened a door she could not close. She now stood at the edge of a choice, one that would test not her strength but her integrity. The next morning, Claire Bennet drove back toward the village while the light was still low and pale. She hadn't slept much. The letter, the box, the quiet weight of what she had uncovered kept her thoughts restless through the night. She knew one thing with certainty now. If she was going to make sense of what she had found, she would have to ask the land itself, through the people who had stayed when others left. She stopped at the first house that showed signs of life. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, thin and gray against the mountain air. An elderly man opened the door after her second knock, leaning heavily on the frame. His posture bent, but his eyes alert. Claire introduced herself and explained why she was there. She asked about the abandoned farm on the hill. The man studied her for a moment, as if weighing her intention rather than her words. Then he nodded slowly and stepped aside to let her speak without interruption. "That place remembers," he said at last, "even if people try to forget." Over the next hour and then another, Claire spoke with several of the older villagers, those who had lived there long enough to watch the land change, to see families come and go. Their stories overlapped. sometimes contradicting small details, but the heart of them remained the same. The farm had belonged to a man named Samuel Cole. Samuel had grown up on that land and inherited it young. He married Helen not long after, a woman from the city who had followed him out of love and optimism. At first, they tried to make it work, but the farm was demanding, and money was scarce. When Daniel was born, the pressure grew heavier. Samuel took a job as a long-haul driver to support them. He was gone for weeks at a time, crossing state lines, living out of his truck, sending money home whenever he could. The villagers remembered him as quiet, reliable, never late with a delivery, never reckless. When he came back from a route, he spent every free moment with his son, fishing, walking the woods, teaching him the names of trees and birds. Daniel followed him everywhere, proud and attached. But love did not ease exhaustion. Helen was left alone with the farm, the animals, the house, and a growing child. Winters were harsh. The work never stopped. Over time, resentment replaced patience. The villagers spoke carefully about her, not with judgment, but understanding. She had not been weak. She had been overwhelmed. Eventually she left. She met another man in the city, someone steady, present, rooted. She took Daniel with her, believing she was choosing stability over struggle. Samuel did not argue. According to those who remembered, he accepted her decision quietly, asking only that his son be treated well. Daniel, however, did not see it that way. To him, his father's silence felt like abandonment. He left the farm angry, confused, carrying a resentment he did not know how to release. Samuel returned to driving. Not long after, he became ill. He told no one beyond what was necessary. He continued working, continued sending money, continued living as though time were something he could negotiate with. When he died, the farm stood empty. Claire listened without interrupting, absorbing each fragment of the story. The parallels pressed closer than she expected. Families shaped by absence, by choices made under strain, by love expressed too quietly to be understood in time. Before she left the village, one of the elders mentioned that Helen and Daniel had settled in a nearby city years ago. Claire thanked them and returned to her car, the path ahead suddenly clear. She drove toward the city that afternoon, the mountains falling away behind her. With every mile, her sense of purpose sharpened. The inheritance she had found was no longer an abstraction. It belonged to real people, to a family fractured by distance and misunderstanding. As she crossed the city limits, Claire felt something deepen inside her, not grief, not resolve alone, but empathy. The land had told its story. Now, it was her turn to listen to the people who carried its unfinished chapters with them. Claire Bennett found Daniel Cole in the most unremarkable way possible, through an address scribbled on a county record and confirmed by a quiet phone call that ended with a long pause on the other end of the line. He did not ask many questions. He only said he would be home that evening. The apartment was modest, tucked into an older building near the edge of the city. When Daniel opened the door, Claire recognized him immediately. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his posture shaped by physical work and long hours outdoors. There was a stillness about him, a restraint that suggested someone accustomed to responsibility rather than comfort. He looked at her with guarded curiosity. Inside, a boy sat on the living room floor assembling a puzzle. He was around 10, his movements careful, deliberate. When he glanced up, Claire noticed the contrast immediately. The sharp intelligence in his eyes, the unnatural flush in his cheeks, the faint shadows beneath them. This was Ethan Cole. Daniel gestured toward the kitchen, and they moved there quietly, as though sound itself required caution. Claire explained why she had come, keeping her words precise, grounded in fact. She did not speak of destiny or coincidence. She spoke of a farm, a box, a letter. When she placed the envelope on the table, Daniel did not touch it right away. He stared at his father's handwriting for a long moment, his jaw tightening as if bracing for something painful. Then, slowly, he opened it. As he read, the change in him was gradual but unmistakable. His shoulders slumped. His breath caught. The guarded composure he had carried at the door dissolved into something raw and unprotected. He read the letter to the end without interruption, then lowered it, his hands trembling. Tears came without warning. "Why didn't he tell us?" Daniel asked, though the question was not directed at Claire. "Why didn't he say he was sick?" Claire answered softly. Samuel had not wanted them to worry. He had believed he was sparing them pain. Daniel shook his head, a sound breaking from his chest that was half laughter, half grief. "I thought he let us go," he said. "I thought he chose silence." Claire reached into her bag and placed the small velvet pouch on the table. Daniel hesitated before opening it. When he did, the contents caught the light, scattering across the surface in quiet brilliance. He stared at them, stunned, as though they might disappear if he looked away too long. He lifted his eyes to Claire, disbelief etched across his face. "You found this?" "Yes," she said, "under the rowan tree." Something shifted in Daniel's expression. The tension in his brow eased, replaced by recognition. He leaned back in his chair, staring past the table, past the kitchen walls, into a memory that had been buried for years. "I remember now," he said quietly. "He came home from a route one night, pulled me aside, gave me a metal box, and told me to hide it somewhere safe. He said to open it when I turned 18. Daniel swallowed hard. "I was angry then. I forgot about it. Or maybe I didn't want to remember." He looked down at the stones again, then pushed the pouch back toward Claire. "You should keep this," he said. "It's worth a fortune." Claire shook her head without hesitation. "It was never meant for me." She told him everything, about the drawing on the wall, the marked tree, the care with which the box had been buried. She explained that she had come to the farm for her own reasons, but what she found there had changed those reasons entirely. "This belongs to you," she said, "to your family. Your father made sure of that." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of it all. When he opened them again, there was gratitude there, but also something deeper, relief perhaps, or absolution. In the other room, Ethan's puzzle pieces clicked softly into place. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the past settle into alignment. His father had not abandoned him. He had protected him in the only way he knew how. And now, because of a woman who refused to take what was not hers, that truth had finally reached him. The letter had found its owner, and with it came a clarity that cut through years of misunderstanding, clean, painful, and necessary. The decisions that followed were not dramatic. They were careful, deliberate, and grounded in necessity. Daniel Cole sold only a portion of the diamonds, just enough to cover what lay ahead. The process was slower than he expected, layered with evaluations, documentation, and waiting. There were consultations with specialists, second opinions, schedules that shifted without warning. Nothing moved quickly and nothing came easily. Ethan's surgery required travel out of state and weeks of preparation. Daniel took leave from his rescue work, adjusting to a rhythm defined by hospital corridors and early mornings. The operation itself was long and exacting, followed by days that tested patience more than strength. There were setbacks, minor complications, nights when Ethan's breathing faltered and alarms sounded too often, but the doctors remained steady. They spoke plainly, cautiously optimistic, never promising more than they could deliver. When the surgery finally succeeded, relief did not arrive all at once. It came in increments, a stable reading, a cleared milestone, a morning when Ethan woke with color returning to his face. Recovery demanded time. Physical therapy followed. Checkups, careful routines. Daniel learned to wait without resentment. During those weeks away, Claire Bennett returned to the farm. She approached the restoration the same way her parents would have, without haste, without erasing what had been there before. She hired local workers who knew the land and respected it. Repairs focused first on structure, then safety. Walls were reinforced. The roof was secured. Windows were restored rather than replaced where possible. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was made ornamental without purpose. She preserved what could be preserved. The surrounding land was left mostly untouched. Trails were cleared lightly, paths defined rather than imposed. Claire spent long hours walking the property alone, learning its contours, noticing where light settled in the mornings and where shadows held late into the afternoon. She imagined her parents standing there once, seeing the same horizon, believing in what it could become. When Daniel and Ethan were cleared to travel, Claire drove to meet them. Ethan was thinner, slower, but unmistakably stronger. His steps were careful, his energy measured, but his eyes were brighter. Daniel watched him closely, adjusting his pace without comment, as if attuned to every shift in his son's breathing. They spoke little during the drive back. Words felt unnecessary. As the farmhouse came into view, Daniel slowed. The transformation was unmistakable but restrained. The house stood firm now, its lines cleaner, its presence grounded rather than neglected. The land around it remained open, familiar, unchanged in spirit. It did not feel new. It felt restored. Daniel stepped out of the car and took it in without speaking. Ethan walked a few steps ahead, curious, careful, absorbing the space. He looked back at his father, then at Claire. There was no excitement in his reaction, only recognition, as if something quiet had found its place. Claire explained what she had done, briefly, without claiming ownership. She spoke of intention, not outcome, of patience, of respect. Daniel listened. Trust did not announce itself. It formed quietly in the absence of expectation, in the fact that nothing had been taken without permission. Nothing changed without thought, in the understanding that healing, whether of land, of a body, or of a life, required time and restraint. As evening settled over the farm, the three of them stood together, not as something defined, but as something beginning. Nothing had been fixed completely, but for the first time the direction was clear. The offer came quietly without ceremony. Daniel Cole waited until evening, until the light softened and the farm settled into its natural stillness. He told Claire that the land should be hers, that gifting the farm was the only way he could properly express his gratitude. Without her, the letter would have remained buried. Without her integrity, the inheritance would have been lost to time. Without her patience, his son would still be waiting. Claire listened and said no. She said it gently, firmly, without hesitation. The farm, she told him, was never meant to be a transaction. It had been a promise, first to his father, then to his family, and finally to the land itself. She had restored it because it deserved care, not ownership as a reward. If there was to be a future here, it would have to be chosen together, freely, without debt or obligation. They stood there for a long moment, the decision settling between them. Daniel understood. He had lived too long with the weight of owing people things he could never repay. Claire's refusal lifted that weight. What remained felt honest. They stayed. There was no sudden declaration, no rush to define what they were becoming. Their days took shape around practical needs and quiet routines. Ethan's recovery schedule, repairs that still needed finishing, mornings that began early and ended without spectacle. They spoke openly when words were needed and allowed silence to exist when it wasn't. Their relationship grew from shared ground. They understood loss differently but completely. Claire had lost her parents without warning. Daniel had lost his father through distance and misunderstanding. Both had learned how easily love could be mistaken for absence, how intentions could be buried beneath silence. Neither tried to fix the other. They listened. They waited. They chose presence over promises. Ethan became stronger with time. His laughter returned gradually. measured and careful but real. The land seemed to welcome him. Open spaces, steady air, room to move at his own pace. Daniel watched his son find confidence again, and in doing so, found his own easing. When they married, it was without urgency. There was no sense of escape in the decision, no attempt to outrun what had come before. They chose each other deliberately, knowing exactly what they carried into the future. The ceremony was small. The commitment was not. It was rooted in understanding rather than illusion. The farm did not change dramatically after that. It didn't need to. It continued to offer what it always had: space, work, quiet, beauty. It became a place where memory and renewal existed side by side, where the past was not erased but integrated. Claire sometimes thought about the door she had opened months earlier, the moment that had shattered the life she believed she was still living. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also removed something false. It had cleared a path she would never have chosen consciously, but one that led her somewhere true. Loss had not disappeared, but it had been transformed. Healing, she learned, did not mean forgetting what had been taken. It meant allowing that loss to guide choices toward something more honest. Moral decisions, made without witnesses, without reward, had reshaped her destiny more than any ambition ever had. The farm had not saved them. It had simply held space while they did the work themselves. For those listening, this story offers a quiet reminder. Sometimes betrayal removes what blocks the future. Sometimes the hardest choices, made without certainty or applause, become the foundation for something lasting. Healing does not erase loss. It gives it meaning. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on a time when loss redirected your life in ways you couldn't see at first. Consider the choices you made when no one was watching and what they led to. Share your thoughts in the comments. Conversations about moral courage, forgiveness, and second chances help others feel less alone. Some paths are not chosen. They are revealed one honest step at a time.